Today in class we completed a warm activity that was matching a table with its equation. I like this activity because it demonstrated that you could have different approaches and reach the same conclusion. And we shared our approaches, and you could model that similarly in a middle school classroom, and I think the kids would benefit from that. Next, Ashley explained the diamond problems. They were great for reviewing operations such as fractions, decimals, integers, and kids, even at the ninth grade level, struggle with integers and fractions and decimals. So these types of activities would be quick and easily applied or used, implemented, there we go, easily implemented in the classroom for that kind of review. You can also start to incorporate variables once you start going through the Algebra 1 curriculum. I also liked that it would help prepare for factoring. So if you start using them in the beginning to review, kids will be familiar with the setup and will be able to use them once you get to the factoring unit. Next, we talked about the big ideas for functions. We talked about the broad definition for functions. There's so many different ways that it's described and represented. We talked about covariation, that there is this relationship between the variables, representing the rate of change, that as the y's change, the x's also change. We talked about the difference between an average rate of change and an instantaneous rate of change. We discussed the families of functions and how they're grouped according to common characteristics. And then finally, the fact that there are multiple representations and students need to be exposed to those. The biggest thing that I pulled out of the function discussion is that we learn about functions and we learn about, the function of x to show that it is varying because of x. It's varying according to x. So I think a lot of times when you have a y and an x, students don't understand that and they don't grasp that concept. So they're using f of x or the function of x brings in the fact that there is this covariation going on. And then we concluded using algebra tiles, scales for solving linear equations, and all of those things can be directly applied into the Algebra 1 course that I teach. I have used them before. I've used the scale. The only aspect of the scale that I wish that we had was an actual scale within the classroom that we talked about today in class. I've never had access to that. I think that would be beneficial. To respond to the questions, for the first one, what benefit did I gain from working with other teachers? We really considered the possibility that as you advance mathematically, you begin to lose some creativity with your problem solving. And that really made you think that are we instructing students in such a way that we're decreasing problem solving and we're decreasing creativity. So do we, even in the more advanced classes, need to create some of these scenarios where kids are working to achieve an answer and not just using a process, but actually struggling a little bit. So that really had us thinking, and it's probably going to be an ongoing discussion. How did the experience of working with teachers impact my learning of algebra and functions? I think really the part that that I felt the most compelled to talk about were the base 10 blocks and the array method for multiplying. That's how students view multiplying in the elementary grades. So why am I not using that to teach distributive property? Why am I not using that to teach multiplying polynomials? So that's something that as I'm learning it, I'm realizing for the first time that this is how I thought about it. This is how I approached it as I was going through school. So why am I not teaching it that way? So I think this year I'm going to introduce at least the array method, probably not the base 10 blocks, but at least bring back into my classroom the array method before we get into multiplying polynomials, and also the algebra tiles. for number 3, how did the experience of working with teachers across grade levels impact your knowledge of how students learn? Again, I started to talk a little bit about how they learn adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. We discussed using a number line, money, and the tiles that you can flip over for one side's positive, one side's negative. I also like this idea of adding in a 0 value, and that really represents an inverse. And inverses are so crucial to all of mathematics. So I like that aspect, and I definitely want to bring that in as we're teaching more advanced subjects. Finally, for the 4th questions, what difficulties did we experience? Clearly, it was the base 10 blocks. I do not remember how to use those things, and my whole group really struggled with those. So there's clearly a disconnect between the process-driven people and the people who have this, creativity, this ability to use these manipulatives and really break down a problem. So the difficulty was absolutely incorporating those base 10 blocks, and even at times the algebra tiles. I just would rather use the process to solve it, but of course the students aren't going to feel the same way.